Before we start the program, I do need to mention that this episode was recorded back in May of this year. The interview is with Kathleen Marden, the niece of Barney and Betty Hill. Some of the topics that we do discuss in this interview have already been elaborated on since then. At one point in the interview, our previous president, Ross Weidler, is asking a question about disclosure. It is interesting to listen to our thoughts of the topic back in May. Enjoy the show.
This is the Paranormal Search radio show and podcast. Discussing unexplainable events that shape our extraordinary world.
3, 2, 1, fire!
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Kathleen. Really happy that you decided to do the show. Have you always been into UFOs, or did this begin with the story behind your Aunt Betty and Barney Hill?
I never even knew about UFOs until September 20th, 1961, when my Aunt Betty Hill phoned my mother, who was 10 years younger than Betty, her sister, and expressed concern that the previous evening this unconventional craft had come so close to her and Barney that she was afraid that they might have been contaminated. We had a neighbor who was a physicist, and she wanted my mother to call this neighbor and ask him what she should do. So before that, no, I'd never heard about it. So I think that's why I remember it so vividly. It was so shocking to be 13 years old and hearing about this.
So when did you first start writing about her experiences?
Oh, I think I actually started my investigation and writing in 1990. I, over the years, had written a couple of magazine articles about it, but the book was not published until 2007. Stanton Friedman joined me in the book in 2005. So it was a very long process because I wanted to do a completely thorough investigation, leaving no stone unturned.
Now, and now you mentioned being a teacher. We didn't get a chance to read your entire, but you got a pretty impressive background here. What type of educator were you, Kathleen?
Well, I started out actually as a social worker interested in psychiatric social work. But my first husband and I went to Cincinnati, where he was studying for his doctorate in the philosophy of psychiatry. So I ended up deciding to go to graduate school and study education, because the first job I could find to support us was in the inner city. So I was working at that time with kindergarten children in the inner city of Cincinnati. And I have taught several different things, never at a high school level. I've taught adults, and I've also taught in elementary school and special needs.
Okay, and you spent 15 years painstaking investigation of just the Hill abduction alone. And it says here you continually seek the scientific analysis of this compelling evidence even today.
Yes, I do. And in the new edition of Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience,
yes, with Stanton,
50th anniversary edition, I have written a new 6th chapter on all of the new scientific investigation and the results that we did not have when I was writing the book back in 2000, from 1990 through 2006 or so. Yes.
That's very interesting. And you worked with Stanton Friedman for 14 years.
Yes.
And you collaborated on 2 additional books, Science Was Wrong and Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers.
That's correct.
Your book with Denise Stoner, The Alien Abduction Files, and that includes your investigation of 6 intergenerational cases of abduction and contact. And your 5th book, Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted, is a comprehensive guide to contact for experiencers. You know, those who love them, professionals who work with experiencers, and the interested public. And you're currently still a contributor to the Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation's Beyond UFOs, the Science of Consciousness and Contact with Non-Human Intelligence.
That's true.
Yep, that's pretty impressive. Have you ever yourself, in your personal life, since you've researched all this information, have you ever seen a UFO yourself or experienced anything unusual yourself?
Yes, I have. I absolutely have.
Tell the listeners about some of those experiences if you wish to do so.
Yes. Well, my Aunt Betty was cooperating with a team of scientists after she and Barney had completed their hypnosis sessions with Dr. Benjamin Simon. So this began in about 1965, and the scientists would give her a script to read, and she was instructed to go out every night and read this information to attempt to call in, sort of like we think of today as a CE5 experiment, to call in this craft and these non-humans. The scientific team was hoping to meet with them. And one of the things that Betty was attempting to do is to have craft land on my grandparents' farm. My grandparents' farm was directly across the street from the house that I grew up in. And in 1965, February of 1965, I had a UFO sighting on a lake near my home. I was with Betty, my mother, my grandmother, my brother, and a family friend. So there were 5 of us. And this craft was first hovering over the lake. It ascended into the air. It stayed up there for a while, and then it descended vertically, kind of in a rocking pattern. When it was at about treetop level, it moved above the treetop and then started to travel toward the opposite end of the lake. We followed it through the grove and down to the end. That there was an island. You had to cross the bridge to get to the island. We turned around on the island and stopped on that bridge to look for that craft. Most of us were looking in one direction, but my mother was looking in another direction, and she saw what appeared to be 2 craft hovering above the ice. And one of them started to emit a beam. It wasn't like turning on a light beam. It was a blue beam that came in a measured way toward her. And we know today that is the carrier beam that they take humans to craft on. But we didn't know what that was in those days. It struck my mother, and we heard her yell, and we immediately went to her, and we got into the car and decided to get out of there quickly. Those craft lifted up into the air, and one of them was beside Betty's car as she was driving out. It was above the treetops, not at street level, but we could see it as we drove out and back to my grandparents' home. Barney was there with my grandfather, and they said they should have come with us because television reception was terrible that night. They couldn't watch a thing. So that happened. And then 2 months later, a craft landed on my grandparents' farm, 200 feet from my childhood home. And it was observed by a neighbor of ours who was a commercial pilot returning home at night, and my grandmother who was in bed. My grandparents were both in bed. And so she heard or saw this. She got up and looked at it through the window. She closed the shades and got my grandfather, and they were frightened. They heard a series of knocking sounds on the door that seemed to be measured knocks. And my grandmother had been kidding with Betty and said to her, well, you know, if your friends are around, tell them to stop by and have a cup of coffee. Talking about the ETs.
Yeah.
And so my grandmother was wondering if they might be wanting to do that, not to have coffee, but to visit the family at least. And that was, both of those were reported to NICAP, and maybe after all, I'm not certain, but they were reported, and very strange things started to happen in my childhood home after that occurred. We had not had paranormal activity in the home prior to that. Suddenly, we started to have doors that were opening on their own. There was someone who appeared in our driveway. They appeared to have lit up a cigarette, and then they never came to the door. They just sort of vanished. This was seen by other people, not just my parents and my family. My father was a Boy Scout leader, and it happened when there were other Boy Scout people at our home planning some kind of they were having a committee meeting. Something else that happened was that there was some poltergeist activity. Once in a while, something would just fly off a shelf. And another thing that happened was light orbs. Now, I didn't see those because I was in college at that time. But the rest of my family did. They were home. These light orbs that
Excuse me, sorry.
Intelligently controlled were in the home. And I ended up actually seeing one years later. It was my first child was born in 1978, and he was 5 years old. We were staying at my mother's house. I was in the bedroom next to his, and I heard him making a lot of noise in the middle of the night. He woke me up. And so I was kind of peeved, and I was stomping into his bedroom to tell him to settle down and get into bed. It wasn't time to play. But I opened the door, and there he was chasing around one of these orbs. And the orbs seemed to be having fun. It was like I detected that both of them were having a great time together. And, you know, at the time all of this was going on, we thought, well, suddenly there was a ghost in my mother's house. It moved in. It hadn't been there previously. But then later on, when I discovered through the 3 major research studies that I've worked on, 2 with PhD scientists, that these orbs are reported by 61% of experiencers. They're in their homes. They appear to have intelligence. And another time when my husband and I were visiting my mother, we were sleeping in her bed. She was in a twin bed in the house. And so we were awakened during the night by what we thought was a cat walking around on the bed. And I kept reaching for it. I couldn't feel it, but I could feel the indentation in the mattress. And so we turned on the lights. We looked for the cat so we could throw it out of the room. And we couldn't find it. We told my mother about it the following morning, and she said, "Oh, I meant to tell you about that. That's been happening." We found that this motion in the mattress that is the sense that something is walking on the mattress is prevalent in 58% of experiencers' homes, and when it came to those who were verified abductees, it was 75%. So that was quite extraordinary. It was an eye-opener for me because before I did my first study with Denise Stoner back in 2011 is when we began it. Finished it in 2012. I was pretty much a nuts and bolts researcher. And then we asked questions about the paranormal. Have you seen paranormal activity in your home? And 85% of the experiencers who took part in that study, it was just a general question about paranormal activity. 85% said yes, and that it seemed to be related to contact with extraterrestrials, entities, and craft.
I was just going to ask you that. If you feel it was extraterrestrial or maybe demonic or spiritual in some sense.
No, it appears to be extraterrestrial. I know that there are also spirit orbs, and I know that I've heard that sometimes something can be demonic. I know that there are negative, highly negative spiritual entities, but they're not extraterrestrial.
Yeah, orbs are often associated with Bigfoot sightings as well.
Well, the Bigfoot has been associated with UFO sightings.
Exactly, yes.
As well. So maybe there's a link there. A lot of people think that Bigfoot is interdimensional.
Right. There are quite a few guests that we've had that believe that, and quite a few people we've had at our monthly meetings last year before COVID-19. We've had monthly meetings for years. Mm-hmm. They seem to believe the same thing.
Yes, and I've had contact with Bigfoot investigators who have told me that. So they just passed that information on to me, so I'm repeating it.
So you yourself have never actually seen a Bigfoot?
No, I haven't.
What do you think? Do you think there is a correlation between Bigfoot and flying saucers and aliens?
Well, some people say so. I don't have the statistics on that, but I know that my Aunt Betty Hill was very interested in that, and she had a plaster cast from a Bigfoot foot.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that she was into Bigfoot.
Yes, it was very large. So she was speaking with people who were Bigfoot hunters and had that interest as well.
There's always that one. There are a couple things in common when you have poltergeist activity, alien or any type of unidentified flying object activity. You have cryptid activity. They all seem to go hand in hand, especially with orbs. It's interesting that it's as if anything that's not of this dimension, all this other stuff comes with it.
Yes, it seems to that a portal seems to be open, and all sorts of things appear to come through that portal. Not always, but I've worked on cases. For example, there was one that I worked on in Texas where it was at an airport, and the person he lived at the airport, and he heard people out on by the runway one night, and he didn't know if there were teenagers drinking and was going to vandalize or what. So he went out, and there was a group of 5 adults out there, and they were looking at a UFO. And this pilot said he had no interest in it prior to that time, but it was the most intense brilliant light that he had ever seen. And so he was continued to look for more and would go up into his control tower, and he had lasers of various intensities, and he would use the very intense ones to try to call in craft. And eventually it succeeded. He somehow was able to call them in. And he was able to get photographs of it. But something happened after that, and that is that he started to have visits. One night he was on a call with his sister who was working overseas, and he hung up the phone and just went to the door that looked out into the hangar and his office below, and he opened the door, and there was one bark brown tall entity, at least 6 to 6.5 feet tall, maybe taller, and 3 little white entities. They were not gray, but they were built like grays, and they were wearing silver suits and silver boots, which is unusual. I mean, it's been reported before, but all of this is unusual, what he described. And so he had closed the door very quickly and went up to bed. But then they started to come and take him. His wife eventually left him. She couldn't take it anymore. He woke up dressed in his underwear, barefoot, a half mile away from his house in the middle of the night. He was not a sleepwalker. Another night, he started sleeping with his gun. Another night, he woke up and there was this glowing entity at by the foot of his bed, and the closet was directly in front of that. And he took the gun and he shot the entity, and it just disappeared in a brilliant flash of blue light. And it got worse and worse. He got to the point where he was handcuffing himself to the wall at night when he went to bed and boarding up his window. This was all happening before I began to work with him. He saw me on television and got in touch with me. He had paranormal researchers in, and since it was UFO related, they didn't want to work with him. He had a MUFON investigator in who ended up observing a craft, an unusual, unconventional craft at a fairly close distance from him. And then MUFON did their investigation, and they were done when all of this really paranormal activity began, and demonic activity. You could call it that, or negative entities. He was sitting in his office with his shirt off on a hot summer night, and something raked its fingernails down his chest, causing bleeding. He was having a really horrid time, and there were also time shifts, sort of like you think of when you think of the Skinwalker Ranch up in Utah. And he and his friend, whom I talked to, who was a former state trooper in Texas, attested to this testimony. And he and his mother one night were looking out toward the runway, and they didn't see the runway. They saw daytime. They saw a grassy savanna, and they saw mammoths grazing. So, very much like that giant wolf who came in to the Skinwalker Ranch, approached the family, tried to drag a calf out by the neck, and then they tracked it. They shot it several times. It would not die. Even though they were using very powerful guns, they shot the fur off it. And it just walked off, and they followed it to an area where there was sandy, And the footprints were there. It went around and around and around in a circle, and it simply disappeared. There were no other tracks. So there seemed to be what I think might be interdimensional portals that open up. This is also on former Native American land.
I've heard that, where sometimes all they get a photograph of is a mist when they try to photograph them, or they come out of a mist, or they see footprints, but there's nothing making the footprints. And these footprints have 5 toes instead of 4, like a conventional wolf. The foot looks completely different than an actual wolf.
That's interesting.
Were they able to collect samples of the fur that was shot off the animal?
I don't know if they did or not.
That's a good question. Yeah.
I haven't read about any analysis or seen it on any of the videos that I have watched about the Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah, it's a very interesting place. A lot of weird things going up there.
Yes. Yeah, and it's not just there. It's in several places around the United States.
Yeah, they all seem to be involved with Indian burial grounds.
Yeah.
Wherever there's a werewolf sighting, like the Beast of Bray Road, which you're probably familiar with.
Are they associated with a common ley line?
Yeah.
These different locations?
Yeah. They think that, UFOs are associated with ley lines as well. Yeah. They've been plotted out. So what is this connection, or is there a real connection? I don't know.
Kathleen, this is Ross Weiler. I'm president of the search program in the radio.
And he's really loud,
Hi,
too.
Ross.
You haven't got a chance to talk to me. This is like a big birthday present for me talking to you.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
She's not giving you
I understand where the sighting was of Betty and Barney Hill. There's a big development there now. Is that correct?
That is correct. For years, it was just a dirt road with tall trees all around, the backlands of a farm. But that property was sold either in the late 1990s or around the turn of the 21st century. And it has been developed, it's paved. There are houses all along that area now.
Are they having any activity with UFOs up there in that development?
I don't know, because I currently live in Florida, and I haven't gone up there very often in the 11 years that I've been down here in Florida. It's something that I want to know more of. When I lived in New Hampshire and I was doing investigations in that area, I did abduction investigations and also spoke with people who either had close encounters or had craft actually land on their property up in that area.
Well, they have a sign there, I think. It's blue and yellow letters saying the Betty and Barney Hill site. I don't know if you've seen that.
I'm behind that. There was a man from New Hampshire who got in touch with me not long after Betty died, a year or two later. And he had a petition that he was having people sign to ask the state to erect a historical marker. And he asked me if I wanted to get involved in it. So I said, yes, that I would. And so then the state started speaking with me about it. I had to send in a couple of dozen books and Pease Air Force Base, Project Blue Book report, the NICAP report, a lot of documents indicating that this was real. And then I helped to write the text on that historical marker. It's dark green with white writing. It's a state of New Hampshire historical marker, and it sits out in front of the Indian Head Resort on Route 3. It's right off 93 in Lincoln, North Lincoln, New Hampshire, just south of Franconia Notch.
Well, I'm pretty sure the Historical Society was pretty much involved with this, weren't they?
Yes, it's a historical marker, state of New Hampshire historical marker.
Mm-hmm.
They do that all over the United States with sites where there have been battles and different historical sites, and I was so pleased that they erected one for Betty and Barney.
Well, I basically wanted you to know a little bit about that sign they put up. As you're driving up the road, it tells you where the sighting occurred. And there is homes there, trust me, I've seen the pictures. So it's kind of nice they did that. Mm-hmm. I have a friend that lived up in that area, and she knew about your family too. And she also knows Pico, the book writer. And she's been up there, and she had told me some stories that she had heard about it. So it's kind of interesting up there.
It is. It is. But so many people in New Hampshire have had their own sightings. And, of course, there was a UFO flap back in the mid-1960s where many, many people were seeing craft, reporting craft. I worked on a case of abduction near Ashland, New Hampshire, where two women and one woman's son were driving to a choir practice at night. It was taking place at her parents' home, and they pulled over to the side of the road because there were lots of cars had pulled over to look at this UFO that was just there in the sky. Drew a lot of interest. They finally decided to get back into their car and head towards her parents' home because they were going to be late. So as they turned off the highway to take the road to her parents' home, there was a craft that hovered right over the highway. And instead of stopping, she decided to floor it and go directly under it.
That's awesome.
If you do that, you end up on that craft. And so
really?
they were taken, and their car was placed back a couple of hours later on the other side of that highway on the opposite ramp.
Wow.
And they knew the owner of a garage. They stopped at the garage. The owner saw the UFO, other people who were there. And as they drove to her parents' house, the craft then came down low in front of them and took off. And by the time they arrived at their parents' house, they were the choir practice was over. So it was an interesting case. And those women seemed to be called back by these crafts periodically, where one would call the other, and they would go out to a field or somewhere and meet craft. They would see it. So that was pretty common back in that time frame.
Was it always the same shape of craft?
No, there were many different types of craft. There were a lot of the circular craft back then. That was probably the most prevalent. But I'm aware that triangular craft go all the way back into the 1940s. And also there were smaller craft that looked something like a helicopter, but they were completely silent and there was no rotor on top of it. And they generally held a couple of entities and one or two experiencers, and they would be used to take people sometimes to larger craft.
How long did Betty and Barney live after this incident?
Barney died in 1969. Now, Betty and Barney never wanted this story to go public. They wanted it to remain confidential. They were willing to talk to the military, to UFO investigators, to scientists, the family and close friends, and we were sworn to secrecy. But one of Betty's friends, she became her friend. She was a UFO investigator, and she spilled beans to a Boston newspaper reporter. He got in touch with Betty and Barney, and I have the letter where he names her and said that he'd been talking with her, and he would like to meet with Betty and Barney. Well, Betty and Barney refused to speak with him, and they said, no, we don't want this story made public. And he even promised them if they would meet with him, he would never, it was for his own interest, he would never write about it. And they still said no, but in late October of that year, for 5 days, the article ran in the Boston Traveler newspaper. And it was terribly distressing to Betty and Barney. At that time, Barney had been elected to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights as a representative from the state of New Hampshire. He had also been given an award by Sergeant Shriver and the governor of New Hampshire. Sergeant Shriver was the head of the poverty program back under Johnson's administration. And so no way would they want to be known. Betty was a social worker for the state. Barney worked for the post office. They were both actively involved in the NAACP. Barney was legal redress. So they were doing good things for the people of their county, of the city of Portsmouth, of their state. The three of us were invited guests at Lyndon Johnson's inauguration in January of 1965. So before any of this was made public. And after it was made public, it all changed, and it was terribly distressing for Barney. And the criticism that came was very difficult for him to take, because he was a highly intelligent man. He had an IQ of 140. He was very brave. He was committed to the civil rights movement and to doing very good things. He was respected. And all of a sudden, he's put in the category of UFO kook.
Yeah, that would be something hard to live down.
Yes, absolutely. I think that the stress and Philip Klass began his debunking activities in late 1966. And I think that kind of criticism really hurt Barney a great deal. And he ended up having a massive cerebral hemorrhage in 1969, February of 1969. Yeah. It was fatal. Betty lived on. She was promoted to supervisor in the welfare department. And she died in 2004 from lung cancer that had metastasized.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to give you a $100 question here.
Okay.
What happened to the dress?
The dress is at the University of New Hampshire. I'm the trustee of the estate. And so I set up an archival collection that were Betty's wishes, to donate all of her files. And the dress, the sculpture, the painting, to the University of New Hampshire at the Milne Special Collections.
I was just going to ask you what happened to those.
There, everything is there, and I have my own collection here of all of the paperwork.
Well, I don't know if the listeners understand what the dress is. Could you explain that to us? We know what it is, but yeah.
I'd be happy to. On the night that Betty and Barney were taken, Betty's dress was in fine condition before that UFO encounter. She had put it on that day. They had just been tourists, had a wonderful day, and decided that they would drive home to their house on the seacoast if they weren't too tired, or they would stop at a motel or cabin along the way if they did grow tired. So anyway, this craft came in closer and closer, and finally it came down over their vehicle. After Barney stood in the field, close encounter field, and looked at it when it was hovering only 100 feet above him, and he saw these non-human entities dressed in black, shiny suits looking down at him. Something started to drop down out of the bottom of the craft. Little red lights started to extend out of the craft, and we know today what that light is. It's the same thing that was projected towards my mother. It is a carrier beam. So anyway, Barney had the distinct impression that he was going to be captured, ran to the car screaming to Betty. They had to get out of there. They were going to be captured. He started speeding down the highway. He saw the craft heading in his direction as he was entering the car. Within minutes, he and Betty heard a series of code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of the car. They felt an electrical tingling sensation through their bodies. The next thing they knew, they were 35 miles down the highway with memories of finding themselves on a dirt road with tall trees all around. They remembered encountering a roadblock. They didn't know where it was, but they also recalled observing a huge fiery orb that appeared to be sitting on the ground. They drove on home, and when they arrived home, Betty discovered that her dress was torn in several places. It was torn from waist to hemline. The hem was torn down on one side. The zipper that ran up the back of her dress needed repair, or to be replaced, actually. The stitching was out for a couple of inches. There was a 1-inch tear in the thick zipper fabric, and the tops of Barney's best dress shoes were so deeply scraped he had to buy new shoes. Their watches had broken and never ran again. There were shiny spots on the trunk of the car, and when Betty, the physicist, told her to place a compass over the spots, the needle whirled. And so it is an indication that there was a magnetic field around the trunk of their vehicle, and that was where they heard those buzzing sounds.
Yeah, I saw something recently. The scuffing of Barney's shoes was caused by him being dragged, and his by dead weight, and his shoes were dragging against the ground. Is that what caused that?
Shoes. Yes. Barney didn't feel he was being dragged.
Yeah.
He could not feel that he was being supported, but he thought he was being supported.
Okay.
His body was leaning forward. He felt as if he was floating, and only the toes of his shoes were bumping along the rock. And then he could feel them sliding up a ramp, a smooth area. They bumped at the top, like in a submarine, and then he was taken down this darkened hallway and into an examining room. But Betty's dress was torn. She remembered under hypnosis that when she was taken down that path, first she fought for her life. Although they had reassured Betty and Barney that they would not be harmed, they only wanted to do a few simple tests, and they would then be on their way. Betty didn't believe them. She didn't trust them. She thought that she might never see her family again. And so she fought for her life, and her dress, the lining and the hem were torn down when she kicked one of them.
She kicked one?
She was trying to get away. She kicked him.
Well, didn't they take a sample of that dress?
There have been many samples that were taken by scientists. I'm in charge of that. If a scientist wants to do an analysis of the dress, either DNA or a chemical analysis, then I can cut a sample out of that dress when I go to the archival collection at the university.
Well, the
ETs did not cut a sample of the dress.
The material on the dress, did they determine that to be inconclusive, that they didn't know what that substance was? that was.
They were not able to identify it.
Yeah.
They said that it's strange in relation to the dress. It shouldn't be there. The strange thing is that it's most heavily saturated with a pink powder that discolored the dress that grew on it when it was in Betty's closet after she took it off. And so Betty remembered being escorted by entities who wrapped their fingers around her shoulders and under her arm. And that it was heavily saturated there, and also around the bottom of the dress, the hemline. The bodice around the waistline is still the blue color that the fabric had been. So it has undergone scientific analysis several times. I can't tell you the new updates, but there are some exciting updates on that dress. I was up at the University of New Hampshire a year ago with Ben Hansen to do a film television production on Betty's dress, and we turned it inside out, and Ben and I discovered a spot on the lining of the dress that was in the area of Betty's navel. And so we wondered what that was. I cut some samples. I sent them the sample to a scientist and who did a DNA analysis on it. We thought that it might be Betty's blood. I also had like a filter, paper filter with Betty's DNA blood sample on it. Both samples were too old to identify them as blood, but they could be identified as Betty's DNA. And this supports the contention that the needle was inserted into Betty's navel when she was on that craft by the examiner. And this was done 10 years before amniocentesis was being done in a hospital setting.
Which convinces me that this story is quite real. Because he described a lot of things that were not around in 1961.
I know Barney had a gun, too, in the glove compartment. And he had grabbed that to try to protect them both. I guess that didn't work too good.
Well, he had the gun. Actually, in the first book that was written, it was fictionalized.
Excuse me.
Because the publisher insisted upon it. They thought it was too boring, and they weren't going to publish it unless John Fuller changed it and made it more exciting and added more tension. But Captured is not fictionalized. It is based upon the actual files, my investigation, Stanton Friedman's investigation. But that gun, Barney took the gun out of the trunk of the car when they stopped at the Mount Cleveland picnic area north of Franconia Notch in New Hampshire. It was their first stop to take a look at this craft, and it was off in the distance. But Barney was going to walk the dog in this picnic area. There were woods there and picnic tables. And he took the gun out so that he could fire it into the air if any bears came out of the woods. That's why. It wasn't to protect him and Betty. He did have it in his pocket when he walked into the close encounter field. And he felt, under hypnosis, he said, "I'll shoot it down." But he couldn't take the gun out of his pocket. And so it seems like he was being controlled even then, although he had conscious recall for what he observed in the field, except for their actual facial features. He had kind of a mental block.
Did Barney have anything on his clothing?
He had debris on his clothing, around his pants. His clothing went to the cleaners right away. He was wearing a suit, his best brown suit, shirt, tie. They always traveled that way in those days. And So his clothing was sent to the cleaners. His underwear was laundered. Betty's was not. Her dress was not laundered. So Barney didn't develop any pink powder or anything like Brew on Betty's dress. So one of the scientists said something to me that I found very interesting. And I said, oh, well, that's an interesting speculation. And he said, it's not a speculation, it's what happened. And so he was a plant scientist, PhD. And he said that what had happened was that Betty's dress had been sterilized on the craft. And that because it had been sterilized, all the bacteria and viruses that would have been on it were dead. And so when a fungus or a yeast deposited from the floor of the craft and the entity's hand onto Betty's dress, there was an environment in which it could grow and flourish, and then it eventually died. And so he told me that that's what happened to the dress. And he seemed quite certain about that.
I remember in an interview, she mentioned being examined, too, all over her body. But that thing you said about the mold and stuff, just to get back to that for a second, that makes a lot of sense. It could be some kind of mold that grew in there that died off.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did they find anything around the site?
They didn't find the site until 1965.
65.
And, so, and it was, after that scientists went up to the area with them. I'm not aware of, anything except for, the people who own the farm said that none of their animals would go out there. And, that is a sandy area. I have photographs of Betty on that area. I went there many, many times with her over the years. I was with Betty and Barney when they discovered it, when they found it. My grandparents, Betty and Barney, my mother and I were camping in the White Mountains, and my father and two brothers, my father was a Boy Scout leader, my two brothers were Boy Scouts, so they went on another camp out with the Scouts that weekend. But that on that Sunday afternoon, we went out for a drive. Barney was at the wheel, and just all of a sudden, he knew where to turn, and he stopped, and he stopped where there was a path through the woods. There was that area that was had no trees, and funny thing is that even the leaves, nothing seemed to grow in that area where the craft landed or hovered, whatever it did. I guess it had landed.
Is that common? I mean, have you come across other instances like that?
Well, there was one that hovered over the trees near my grandparents' house. And I was only 200 feet away from my house where I grew up. And yeah, there were trees that died after the craft covered and the trees sort of splayed out.
So how are you feeling about everything today?
How do I feel about it? And when I began my investigation, I was a skeptic. I am, with all of the scientific evidence that we have now, with my sentence by sentence comparative analysis of Betty's and Barney's statements to Dr. Simon under separate hypnosis, where he reinstated amnesia at the end of each session, and they didn't learn about what each other said until the last 2 months when the hypnosis sessions were over. I have done so much research. The star map is another thing. I think that there's overwhelming evidence indicating that this was real.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how anyone can deny it at this point.
Yeah, how would she know about Zeti Reticuli in 1961?
No, Betty didn't. Betty didn't know
that.
what it was identified as. But, she sketched that map. She was not an amateur astronomer. It was the result of a post-hypnotic suggestion where she had begun to trust the one that she called the leader on the craft. And she said to him, well, I know you're not from around here. Where's your home port? And he produced this three-dimensional map. And in Betty's dreams, it was the kind of like a window shade that you pull down. That was not what she remembered under hypnosis in this comparative analysis that I did. And so she saw these stars, two large ones the size of nickels or quarters in the foreground, and several others that were connected by solid lines, and then there were others that were just connected by dotted lines. And Dr. Simon told Betty to go home and to try to sketch it if it didn't bother her too badly, and if she could remember it accurately. Now, Betty was also highly intelligent, and in her younger days, she had incredible recall. And she went home and she sketched that brilliant woman from Ohio, Marjorie Fish, who was an amateur astronomer and a school teacher, went on to become a research assistant at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee after she did star map work. She searched for the location of those stars. And it went on for 4 years. Tremendous effort. She went to the university. She had to sit and hand copy all of the distance data and the characteristics of all of the stars in our local galactic neighborhood, 54 light years in all directions out from our sun. And she had constructed 14 of these three-dimensional models using monofilament line and beads of various sizes and colors to represent the types of stars they were. She still didn't have a match at the end of 1971. And then in 1972, a new Gliese catalog was published. It was at the university. She went back. She was able to get more accurate distance data. And there were 3 stars that she discovered had not been thought to be within 54 light years. So they weren't on her three-dimensional model. And she went home. She made all of the adjustments. And when she did, she had a match. And that's where Stanton Friedman came in, because she was looking for a scientist who would vet her work. Cora Lorenzen from the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization called Stanton and asked him when he was in Ohio if he would meet with Marjorie. And he did. He was very impressed with her and her work. He found 3 scientists who vetted her work, who said that it was accurate and that the 2 base stars were Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2. And the sun was on that map as a trade route. There are 2 lines going from those 2 large stars up to the sun.
I understand those lines that were drawn. I think the broken lines meant one thing and the solid lines meant something else. Like places they went to often were broken lines, or solid lines, and the
That's
ones
correct.
they rarely went to were the broken lines.
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay. They were expeditions,
Yes.
whereas the others were trade routes. Now, there are some really important things about that star map that a lot of people don't know about. And that is what convinced so many scientists that this was indeed a real abduction. That's because all of the maps, all the stars connected by lines on Betty's map are sun-like stars, although only 5% of the stars in that volume of space are thought to be sun-like. And all of the sun-like stars in that volume of space are on Betty's map.
Well,
that was extraordinary.
I don't mean to interrupt you. You said earlier said the sun. You talk about our sun or a whole different sun?
Our sun.
Our sun.
Soul. Our sun, Soul, is on that map with two lines. Yeah, with 2 lines.
Oh, just to show the route.
It was a trade route.
Okay,
yeah.
just a trade route. Okay. I thought maybe it was a different sun in that system.
No, not in that system. Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 are located, you can see them from the southern hemisphere. They're in the constellation, the Gnat or Reticulum, and very small and distant.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I guess why it confused me. So they probably go to the sun. Why do you think I've heard a lot of extraterrestrials are attracted to the sun for purposes of collecting energy from it, solar energy, or maybe even nuclear radioactive power or something like that.
Yes, and Stanton always talked about how it would make sense that you would use nuclear energy from the stars to travel through space and stop at different star systems, at different planets, gather your nuclear power, and then travel onto another star system. So that was Stanton's theory, and there have been what appear to be very large craft up around our own sun that might be drawing energy off the sun. And there is a portal from the sun to the earth that opens and closes a few times a day.
You mean between the sun and the earth, or actually on the sun?
On the sun that comes down toward the earth.
Oh, I've heard that. There's like a doorway that opens up on the sun.
Yeah.
And the moon, too.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I hadn't heard about the new moon.
Yeah, supposedly there's like an artificial doorway. It looks like there's this giant artificial doorway on the moon, like double doors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I don't think that has anything to do with the sun thing, but you kind of reminded me of that when you mentioned that. And going back to Betty's experience on that ship, it seemed that she had I know she had a terrifying experience, but there were some things that she said it was kind of amusing. One of them, the stories that she told on a special I saw years ago, is that the examiner came running into the room and talked to the one she called the leader, and they were communicating among each other, and she's wondering what's going on. And the leader says to her, "Well, we're sort of at a conundrum or something like that. We're wondering why Barney's teeth come out, but yours don't."
Right. on her teeth. I mean, that was so funny that there was that conundrum. And, somebody I was doing an interview said, "You just can't make that up."
No, you can't. There's no way. And I think over the years, do you agree that when I first saw or heard this story was back in 1982. I never even knew it existed until then. And the video I played of her that she played on there, Barney had already passed away, and she had done this, I think, interview prior to her passing years before. She seemed almost like she was living with it. She did say this was something that she would never forget her whole life until she died. She said, "I wake up, I think about it. I go to bed, I think about it. I will never forget this." And she had paintings, she had drawings, statues that she created and stuff of the entities. She seemed almost like she learned after a while to actually live with it and accept it. I don't know how it was in the very beginning with her. I mean, only the hypnotist and you, maybe, possibly some other family members might know. But she seemed to almost live with it, and she said she told that story 1,000,000 times.
Yes, yeah. And in the beginning, Betty was just really curious. She was looking for answers, and she just wouldn't leave it alone. She went to the Portsmouth Public Library, took out her first book on UFOs. It was written by Donald Kehoe, and the NICAP address was in there with a request, if you had a UFO sighting, write to us about it. So she did. She and Barney did on September 26th of 1961, only 6 days after their encounter. And in that letter, she talks about the figures dressed in black shiny uniforms that Barney saw when he was standing in the field, and also the unusual flight pattern of the craft. And as the years went by, she wanted to know more and more, just like I do. I started out as a nuts and bolts investigator, and I'm really very much into experimentation at this point to learn more and talking to people around the world about what is happening in their country.
That was going to be my next question to you. When you say experimentation, what type of involvement with experimentation do you have personally?
I have worked on CE5 experiments, trying to call in craft. One time when I tried it, a craft did show up. It was a triangular, kind of a fluorescent green, bright glowing green triangle, and I was just amazed. And the next day, I went to MUFON's website, and other people in the next town over had reported the same thing.
Wow.
And then I've worked with actually attempting to meet and speak with these non-humans, with people who are doing that. And I had some success in that. I couldn't see them because they were vibrating at a higher frequency, but I could feel that very strong electrical tingling sensation.
Yeah.
And they communicated with me telepathically. And I was with a team of researchers who were doing that. It wasn't just me alone. And there were 2 skeptics in the group. There was a psychotherapist. There were UFO investigators in the group, and also remote viewers. And we were able to measure an increase in the temperature in the room where that entity was standing that we couldn't see. Sometimes we could see kind of a change, kind of a shimmering effect, but it didn't materialize in front of us. There were several of them, and they still come to me from time to time. Ever since that time, they said they would protect me, and I sometimes receive downloads of information. And when I'm speaking with experiencers, or even sometimes on shows that where the host is an experiencer, I can just feel that tingling sensation. So that was one experiment that I found very fascinating, a little bit frightening, but still fascinating. I'm doing everything I can. One of the experiments I did was to see how the compass needle would react to the metal on a 1957 Chevy, because the skeptics were saying, oh, any old car will cause compass needles to fluctuate. Well, it fluctuated a little tiny bit, but it certainly did not whirl the way that it did for Betty and Barney and the people who lived upstairs from them. So, that I saw those thoughts myself.
We had a lot of guests that discussed some of the same things you discussed about vibrations and stuff like that, and meditation to communicate with the entities.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you have to cut off all external sounds. You have to meditate before you can do this.
Kathleen, this is Ross. You work with experiencers, correct?
I do, yes.
Were you ever one?
Yes, I was.
Yeah, she kind of explained that in the beginning.
And my mother was as well.
Oh, really?
Since you asked me, we never made this public. I was going to take it to my grave. My mother did. But when that craft landed on my grandparents' farm, my mother and I ended up on that craft.
Oh, wow.
It was investigated by APRO. We were hypnotized by Dr. James Harder, and we insisted on confidentiality, and we kept that confidential, and until I was about 70 years old, and people kept coming to me, and they said, you really need to tell people that you're an experiencer too, and they just knew. And they said it will help so many of those people that you're working with. And so I thought about it, and I thought, well, I have nothing to lose at this point. So I will admit, yes, I am an experiencer. I'm a generational experiencer. Betty was, my mother was. My mother went grocery shopping one time when I was a teenager, and did I tell you that already? I've done 3 interviews today.
But I was curious about. Just one more question about this. Are these the same alien beings that Betty and Barney Hill encountered?
Yes.
They were the same.
They were the same. Yes.
And they're from the Zeti
smaller
Reticuli.
Ones, and then there were the taller ones who were very friendly.
Okay.
And kind of, Betty said that their face was more Asian, broad cheeks, flat face. That's what I remember.
Okay.
And, not from those. The smaller ones, they were very frightening. I didn't like them at all. But the one that I call my escort, who met with me time and time again, periodically throughout my life, was very nice and friendly, even though I was terrified. I was just scared silly. I was traumatized until I underwent hypnosis, and I remembered how very nice they were, and it wasn't frightening at all, and then I lost my fear.
What I did want to ask you a question, quick. What did you think of Disclosure coming up June 6th? Do you think they're going to tell the truth?
I think that they're going to give us some information, but when that information is classified, they're not going to reveal anything that is top secret code word, above top secret, because it's a matter of national security, and most of the UFO files are above top secret. Some of them might be top secret. There's a good chance that won't be revealed either. They'll probably declassify secrets.
Yeah, well, I always make a joke about black. You know how they redact all the files. That's what they'll disclose to us. Sergeant Black was in Black, United States. Saw a Black. The entity looked like Black. Thank you, gentlemen, and have a nice day. Something like that.
Right. That could be. And they're using white now. Stanton always used to talk about that.
Oh, they're using white now?
Okay. Yeah.
I'll have to change my routine then. White.
Yeah, he always used to see the black, redact.
We're going to wrap this up, Kathleen. Thank you very much for being a guest on the show. For you listeners out there, her essays have been published in several additional books and magazines, and her books are available in all formats on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Autographed copies can be purchased at her website, www.kathleenmarden.com. And many of you may know her. She's given many on-camera commentaries on Discovery, History Channel, National Geographic, Destination America, the Science Channel, Travel Channel, and other documentaries. Most recently, her work has been featured on Ancient Aliens and several Travel Channel shows. She's lectured at conferences across the United States, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, and the UK. And she's given video lectures in Denmark and China. You've got many credits there, Kathleen. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the listeners?
Kathleen-Marden.
I'm sorry, Kathleen-Marden.com?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll have you on the show again sometime.
Okay,
if you'd like. We'll let you know. And don't let the aliens take your teeth out.
You have a good night, Kathleen, and
my
thank
own.
you very much, dear, for coming on.
Okay. Thank you so
Yeah, thank you
much.
very
You
much,
take care.
Kathleen. You're very sweet.
Thank you for joining us this episode. If you would like to attend our monthly meetings, you may do so by visiting the Lower Paxton Municipal Building in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We meet the second Wednesday of every month between the hours of 7 and 9 p.m. Please visit our Facebook page, that is Paranormal Search of Pennsylvania. There you will find links to our YouTube channel and website.